What was the survey about?
So Junior and I are in Miss Chan's statistics class, and she went through a different marriage, and we were wondering if anything changed in the class dynamics between, pre-Lolly, if you will, to after. So what we started to do was we started to narrow down what may have changed, and we came to the conclusion that maybe the motivational level of students in her stats class changed before she was married to after she was married due to her marriage. So we started asking a couple of different students what they felt about the subject, and then from there we went on to conduct a survey. So Zach, how did Miss Chan's marriage affect you?
I mean, it kind of made me sad when she got married.
Did that hurt your motivation?
Hurt my feelings more than anything.
Did you do better in the class or worse?
I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it.
So Debbie, how did Miss Chan's marriage affect your motivational levels? It didn't affect it at all? Your grades didn't drastically drop?
No, they went up.
They didn't? Okay.
How did Miss Chan take to this?
Well, so we started talking to her about, Miss Chan, how do you think your marriage affects your teaching ability / motivation of the students? And, well, I wouldn't say she took it badly, but she definitely wasn't responsive. She didn't really want to talk to us. I think we have a video of this, actually. Miss Chan, can we interview you? Miss Chan, are you refusing to be interviewed because about the subject? Maybe for some reason? Maybe you're denying something?
Kicking back some brews with the other 7 billion people on the planet, and we were just wondering, why on earth is your study important to us?
Well, a classroom is extremely, extremely delicate, and any sort of change in it can ruin the productivity throughout the year, causing havoc for, say, for instance, the final test. Grades will slowly drop because the classroom isn't working as it should. And like I said, it's extremely, extremely delicate. And I've also, to give you an example of how delicate it is, it's kind of like, people when it comes to Godzilla. People will freak out, run through the streets if they see a reptile, if they hear an amphibian, if they see some giant scaled monster offshore, they go berserk. They'll be doing their job perfectly normal, and then they'll freak out as soon as you say amphibian. And that's a lot of the classroom. As soon as you say, hey, we're going to get a substitute for a week, they're not doing work anymore. As soon as you say, hey, I'm going to get married, they're like, oh, well, like the new person, does a marriage affect? Does a husband maybe take away some of her time from, focus on me? So it really just affects the classroom in general.
To continue your analogy, Mrs. Chan's marriage is equivalent to Godzilla, and in the same way of the damage that it inflicts on human life?
Well, that's what we're planning on finding out, Bob. We'll find that out.
That's quite a question. How on earth do you plan on answering that?
So what Junior and I decided to do was we're going to create a survey. We're going to figure out the students' motivational levels before and after her marriage. And we'll do this with a certain number of questions that I can show you later. And what we're going to do is we're going to figure out the mean motivation levels from before her marriage and from after her marriage of students who filled out the survey. And from this, we'll conduct a t-test, a different number of t-tests, to see if there's a significance difference between pre-marriage motivational levels and after-marriage motivational levels. And based off this, we'll make a conclusion. So what we did here was we constructed a survey that compares motivation levels from before her marriage to after her marriage. And a motivation mean score of 10 means that the students had a high motivational level, and a mean score of 1 means that the students had a low motivational level. So what we're going to do is, for instance, this question right here: before Ms. Lott was married, how often did you spend time on homework for AP Stat? Now, say the student ranks at 10. That means they have high motivation levels for Stat before she was married. Then we'll ask the same question later on, referring to after she was married, and we'll see if that motivation level that they filled out changed. And
Are there any lurking variables or things you didn't plan for?
well, to be honest with you, we avoided no biases. We actually had everyone in the book with a bias. We had risk of voluntary response, wording of the questions, non-response, response bias, and under coverage. For example, voluntary response, right? We emailed out our survey to all of the stats class, and kids may have been lazy or they just didn't want to respond, so only a certain amount of kids actually wanted to respond. For instance, maybe kids who cared more about the subject responded, and other kids who didn't care about the subject didn't respond. That may have been a problem. Another problem we had was response bias. Some kids may have, let's say, for example, had a good grade in the beginning when she was not married, and then had a bad grade after she's married because of them, but they're going to take that out on her and say that was her fault. So that's what potential response bias we have. Another thing we have is undercoverage. The problem with undercoverage is that we did not plan for the fact that some kids don't have email, some kids couldn't get online, so they may not have actually been able to view the survey, which is a potential problem because we couldn't get their response. And another thing we had was wording of questions. Now, we took time on our survey questions to accurately display motivational levels of the students, but some of the questions may have been a little biased towards one answer or another. And I believe that was all the ones we risked to, yeah. So another one of the assumptions we ran into problems with was the fact that you have to have 10% or less of the population in your sample. Now, 10% of the population of statistics students would be less than 30 students. And that assumption is you have to have a sample size of greater than 30. So we had to kind of not follow that assumption. And so I guess in order to account for all these breaking of assumptions, we're just going to proceed with a lot of caution, take every step of the way with as much caution as we can, put caution tape up all the time, and we're just going to take our results with a grain of salt.
So you were looking at these results kind of bundled in caution tape. Why do you think there were so many different assumptions broken?
We could have done a better job, accounting for all these different biases we had for breaking so many assumptions. But honestly, this lack of money killed us and lack of time. But mainly lack of money.
Alright, so Harry, tell us how you did this.
Alright, so here is the data from our surveys. The higher numbers represent more motivation, lower numbers, of course, less motivation, and then the difference is after minus before. So negative numbers represent a drop in motivation, and then positive numbers in the difference columns represent increased motivation. So we took all this data and we put it into the JMP program, and we got distributions for each of our questions.
So what were the results of your finding?
Alright, so here are our 4 different questions that we asked in our survey. And for the first one, the question is, how did the number of questions you asked during class change, pre and post Lolly? So we asked a question in the survey, got back some results, and our hypothesis was that the difference would be 0. That is our null hypothesis, but the alternative hypothesis is that it would be less than 0. So here are the results of the test. So our actual mean value was negative 0.67, a DF value of 33, and our T value was actually negative 1.66. So at a 0.1 significance level, right here, it is definitely significant. Alright.
So what were the results of the second question?
Alright, so here's our second question. How often did the students stay after class? Let me get this message out of the way. So how often did the students stay after class for extra help? So this one was less significant. I think maybe due to the fact that nobody stayed after class before she got married either. But as you can see, our test statistic ended up at 0.5067. The mean was actually only negative 0.2. So our p-value was 0.2534, so that is not less than our our significance level of 0.1.
So how is the question about the differences in study times?
Alright, so here we have our differences in the amount a student studied for tests. So also not the greatest question, as a lot of students never study for tests. But we have a actual mean value of our sample of negative 0.44, DF33 again. And our test statistic was negative 1.2298, which made our p-value just above our significance level of 0.1. So this question was also not significant.
Can you explain the last test you guys did?
Alright, so this is the difference in what the students thought their friends' motivation was. So I think this is by far the most important question, and this is also our most significant result. So our mean value was negative 1.47, and our test statistic, our t-value, was actually negative 3.6668, which made our p-value point.
So, now what you all been waiting for, the conclusion to our test. So, pretty much for our first question we had, we received a significant p-value of 0.0528. And the question this was for was the difference in like how many questions you asked before Miss Lawley got married, and then how many questions you asked afterwards. And the reason why we believe this was significant is because Miss Lawley, when she gets married, doesn't have time for her questions. She's all like, oh, me, husband, 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 I'm happy with my life. And we're all like, yeah, but we have questions. And you're all like, you know, I'm married, doing my thing. So that's why we believe that was significant.
For the second question, staying after class, this one was actually the least significant out of all of them. And we think we have a very good reason why it was not significant. Because nobody stayed after class before she was married either, so there was no chance for a change in the behavior.
For the other question, the difference in study times, we received a non-significant probability of 0.1137. The reason for this is because no one studied before she was married, and then no one studied after she was married. So I guess in general, no one cared to study. So that's why that wasn't affected by the marriage.
And then our last question, the most important question, was the difference in what we thought our friends' motivation level was. The reason we think this is the most important is because nobody's going to say that they lacked motivation in a class, because everyone's striving to be the best they can be. But we could be honest about our friends and peers in the classroom. And also, the people who were not motivated in class and the people whose motivation dropped were not motivated to complete our survey either. So, this is the most important question. And also, the most significant p-value of 0.0004. Clearly a difference in the motivation levels of our peers and friends. Therefore, we can safely conclude that, in at least most cases, Miss Lawley's marriage decreased our motivation in AP statistics.
What's the solution for this problem? You tell me, Ms. Lawley.